Okay, this is lesson 3, part 3, and we're displaying messages in message boxes. Okay, how do we do that? We're going to actually do more of this in lesson 4 as well. All right, and some people, again, when we talk about message boxes, it's a built-in class that we're going to have access to, that we're going to use a lot. Because typically, and if we're programming, if we first start programming in other languages, what do we do in Java? Where do we get our feedback from Java? The console, typically. You don't do a lot of, like, form applications in Java, right? We use the console for feedback. Well, we don't really use the console here. We can use a console.writeline, here in C# as well. But the better way of doing debugging for us is message boxes. Okay, you can put a lot of message boxes in your code that you don't need, right? That you use for to print out the value of your variables. Especially if you have an error you can't figure out. Oh man, I don't know what's happening here. You know what? I want to print this error out, and I'm not going to use a console because the console is like, it's harder to read, and I want this error to pop up and stop in my face when it happens because I want this variable, the value of the variable to come up. So we use message box. So let's take a look at how you do that. So again, here's the general form, messagebox.show, and you have the text message itself. That's the stuff that's in here, inside the message itself. My title bar.text, right? The message box buttons, which are the type of buttons you want to display in your message box, fully configurable, by the way, and your message box icon. Hey, what if, since you're doing forms application, someone's asked me in the past, well, Tom, I don't want to use this message box. I want to make my own. But yeah, you can. You can make another form of your own, right? And you can customize your message boxes, and we will do this later on in the course, where you pop up your own message box, right? And it's going to work and function your way. But it's all built in, and for most of us, we don't want to recreate the wheel here when it comes to debugging, so we can just use this standard function, if you will, that exists for us to use. So, MessageBox class basically uses a bunch of overloaded methods. All right, the show method is an overloaded method, which means that you can have different arguments, that you can put into the message itself. You don't need to put the title bar text. Okay, you don't need to put the message box buttons. You don't need to put the message box icon. You don't need any of that stuff, right? All you need is the text message itself. Okay, if you put the next one in, you have to put it in order. So if I want to have my title bar text, right, as an example, well, I need to have a message. Okay, so it's using an overloaded constructor method for our show. Okay, and here are the different options for the message box. Text message string, which is a string variable, a string literal that's going to be displayed. Our title bar text, which is also a string. And then our message box buttons, if you actually use Visual Studio's IntelliSense, it'll actually kind of come up with options. You can have an OK button only, OK or cancel, retry cancel, and so on for the types of buttons you can have. Right now, all we care about is that we have an OK button. Next lesson, we'll talk about message boxes in more detail and how to receive data from message boxes buttons that we get from users' input and do something with them. Message box icons are some standard ones: the asterisk, the arrow, the exclamation, and so on. And another reason why we'd want to use message boxes that are built into Windows or VB is because it keeps in line with our standard Windows look and feel. Right? We want to make an application for Windows. We want to make it look and feel like Windows. Right, so the user knows what to do, because we all know how to use Windows, right? So if you make something a pop-up that looks very weird and doesn't function like as we're used to, we're going to be like, wow, that's really annoying, right? Unfortunately, that's how we are as users. We go, that's a really annoying thing. We don't know where everything is, right? Because we expect things to be in a certain spot. An example of that would be go from a Windows to use a Mac, right? You expect your X to be at the top right corner, where the Mac has it at the top left corner, and you're like, hey, that sucks. Mac sucks because of that, right? Because the X's on the control things on the top of the toolbar or the title bar is in a different spot that we're not used to as Windows users, right? Well, this is the kind of same thing we're talking about here. That's why we use standard controls and here in Visual Studio. Okay. Overloaded methods we just talked about in brief. And again, all we're doing is we're using different signatures, different kinds of arguments. We can use one or more arguments, and sometimes none, depending on the overloaded method. Okay. If you want to test multiple fields, again, we can use nested try-catch blocks, like I said. And I'm not going to go over that, but they work very similar to nested if statements. Okay. Counting and accumulating sums. To me, all the counting and accumulating we're going to do, if we're going to count sums within a procedure, a lot of times when we do things, we do them in the calculate button. If I click a button, that's where I want the stuff to happen. The button is going to drive how I'm going to build my UI, right? So I might have all these inputs for the user, right? I'm requesting that the user inputs 1, 2, 3, or more fields, or whatever, right? But my calculate button, or my whatever button I use that I click on, is going to create the calculations that I'm going to use, right? So that is where you're going to do all the calculations for your code. However, you may want to keep track of calculations from one screen to the next, and sometimes there's a value in doing it at class level, which I'm going to show you here. So here we talked about adding on values. So I have my discounted price sum decimal. I can do this at the class level at the top. I keep a class variable, and what I'm doing here is I add on to there. Plus equals is just add on or accumulate my discounted price decimal. So maybe I have more than one purchase I'm doing, and I want my code, my little app here, to always remember all the calculations that I'm doing. Well, I keep those variables at class level because they won't disappear. That's the woman in the red dress that'll stay with me for the entire class, right? As opposed to disappear after I use my click event, right? So I click on the button. Every time I click, she exists, and then she dies, right? I don't want that. I want her to keep living, and I want to have that calculation go forward, so I do that at the class level, okay? Some people will say, well, Tom, isn't like making variables at the class level, isn't that kind of like a global variable? No, they're class variables, totally different. Although sometimes I feel like I'm cheating when I say that. All right, that's it for today. Right now, we're going to talk about our hands-on programming. I would ask that you do your hands-on programming here in class. I know some of you are like, we'll leave after this is done, right? I'm not going to go over it with you. I'm not going to force you to do it. And again, at one time, we used to give marks, like a 1 mark for doing your hands-on programming. And yes, there's a great value in doing this because it forces you to do stuff, and you want to stick around, right? On the downside, people who don't show up are like, I couldn't show up. My car broke down, and I couldn't get there. My baby fell asleep, and blah, 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 all these different things. And I couldn't make it in, so can I get the mark anyway? And the answer is no, right? So I stopped doing it for that reason because I don't want fights with people for 1 mark. But anyways, I would ask you that if you follow the same thing, create this form here in class. We're sitting here at, 12:15, so we still got 40 minutes some odd, or in that range, or 30-something minutes to do it. And this is typical of a little modification. So I would recommend to you, don't leave. Do this hands-on programming assignment now here in class before you take off for next week. Okay? Otherwise, that's me signing out.